He's a college football analyst for Pro Football Focus and the host of Preferred Walk On. Our good friend Max Chadwick, he joins the show to talk all things SEC, college football, everything in between. Max, what's going on, my man? Appreciate you taking the time.
Of course, Chris. Thanks for having me on, man. I really appreciate it.
So, Max, first, for those who may have never heard of you or they have not followed you, tell folks about yourself. Again, you've been with Pro Football Focus on the college side of things, which I think everybody tuning to this is familiar with Pro Football Focus. And also, you've got a fantastic show, Preferred Walk On, which is a ton of fun. You guys do a lot on social media. So just let the folks know. Take a moment to plug yourself, Max.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I've been PFF's college football analyst for a couple of years now, which has honestly been a dream come true. It's the company I've always wanted to work for. It's the job I've always wanted to do. So it's been amazing, man. And yeah, we started that show Preferred Walk On last year, interviewing a ton of top players, doing episodes in the NFL draft, doing episodes obviously on college football and around college football. So yeah, you can find Preferred Walk On wherever you get your podcasts, also on YouTube as well. And then all my articles are available at pff.com as well. I'm kind of doing top 10 players at every position right now that a lot of people have disagreed with on Twitter. But yeah, if you want to check those out, you can check them out at pff.com.
Max, why do you think PFF catches so much heat for stuff like that? And why? Because it's almost kind of one of those things where it's like, if you want to argue with science, because I know there's a lot of formulas that you guys, and you're just really plugging in numbers. And that leads me to, though, like, how much of it for you when you rank players, grade players, talk about players and teams, et cetera, you have the numbers there, but how much does eye test go into that? Because I feel like sometimes the numbers can say one thing, but with your eyes, we see something different.
Yeah, you have to watch tape. You know, it's not possible for me to do my job without watching these players. And listen, our grades and our numbers are extremely valuable, and they're kind of the backbone of everything that you do at PFF. But you also have to be able to watch these guys and know exactly what they do well, what they don't do well. So, you know, that's something that I've had to do with my rankings of these players, because it's not just the ranking the top 10 players at every position based off of how they were graded. Because if they were, then you would see a lot of group of 5 players, Sun Belt players, be like number 1 and 2 because they graded out super highly. But, you know, are their grades equal to that of an SEC player? That's something I have to take into account. So, yeah, obviously PFF is a little controversial sometimes, especially the NFL side of things. I know people don't love the fact that we try to grade every player and every play and every game. But I also think that our metrics are a better indicator of what players are actually doing well and what they're actually doing poorly than any box score number would indicate, honestly. So, yeah, again, we're controversial. I understand that for some people, but I do think it's a very, very valuable tool as well.
So, Max, you mentioned you're doing grades right now, top 10 grades. Let's talk SEC players specifically, and if you want to target in on zeroing in on one position or the entire SEC, I'm just curious, the top graded players in the SEC coming into the 2024 season, where does that take you? Who, if you just want to name off a few, who are those guys that are at the very top of the SEC when it comes to PFF's grades? Again, I think a couple we could probably think of off the top of our head, but are there any surprises there, or is it pretty much as you'd expect at the top of the league?
Yeah, honestly, it's a really good league. Obviously, it's not a surprise considering SEC is always, one of the top conferences, if not the top conference in college football. And yeah, as of right now, my number 1 quarterback entering next year is Carson Beck from Georgia. I think he was phenomenal this past season. I actually wrote in that article, I said it's kind of rare for a program to lose a 2-time national championship winning quarterback in Stetson Bennett, and they actually improve under center. And that's exactly what Georgia did, honestly. I know Carson Beck didn't win a national title like Stetson Bennett did the last 2 years, but I still think he was an upgrade for Georgia at quarterback. And he's phenomenal this past season. I think he's going to be the top quarterback next year. Some really good other SEC quarterbacks. I think Jalen Moreau is really underrated still. I think he with Kalen DeBoer is going to be a really exciting pairing. Obviously, Quinn Ewers coming in, Jackson Dart as well. Brady Cook had a really good year. Then you look at the other positions like receiver. Luther Burden III is a top receiver in college football, in my opinion. So he's my number 1 receiver. I came out with that already. Will Campbell, LSU's left tackle, is a superstar. Parker Brailsford, the center from Alabama, will be my number 1 interior offensive lineman. There's a lot of really, really good SEC. I mean, James Pierce Jr., I haven't mentioned yet. He's probably maybe the best defensive player in college football entering next year. There's a little bit of an argument with him and some other guys, but he was phenomenal for Tennessee this past season. Edge defender, he's probably going to be a top 5 pick in next year's draft. SEC has a lot of talented players in 2024, which shouldn't be too much of a surprise, but it should be a very fun conference next year for sure.
So, Max, you mentioned the quarterback position, Carson Beck, again, no surprise. Talk about some of the other guys there. You mentioned Brady Cook, you mentioned Jackson Dart. What does the rest of that list look like? And obviously, again, there's a number of new faces in the SEC, but outside of Beck, is there a large drop off? And what does 2 through maybe say 4 or 5 look like in the conference?
Yeah, so I think I don't think it's a big. Honestly, I don't think it's a very strong position at quarterback going into next year. I think you're losing a lot of the top guys in college football, and what kind of evidence points to that is that you look at all the top quarterbacks returning to college football. They all could have declared for the NFL draft, and they would have been probably second round picks or worse if they declared. So that's why it's kind of a weaker position as of right now, at least for college football next year. I do think Carson Beck is to me the pretty clear number one guy, not only in the SEC but in college football. And then Jalen Moreau, I had right behind him at number 2, and Quinn Ewers and Jalen Moreau are kind of like equal in my opinion in terms of how good they are. And I know Milroe gets a lot of flack. I think his deep ball is phenomenal. He's one of the best dual threat quarterbacks as well. Ewers was really, really good last year as well, but there's still some times where the Texas offense helped him out a lot more than other quarterbacks. We used a lot of RPOs, a lot of play action, and also he played with some really, really talented receivers at Texas as well. So Quinn Ewers will have to shoulder the load a little bit more next year. I'm excited to see what he could do in his senior year. But Jackson Dart is another guy I really like. Again, kind of like Quinn Ewers. Ole Miss offense really helps him out, but he also has a mastery over that Lane Kiffin offense. And then, Brady Cook has really took a major leap last year. Always been a really good runner. Really became a lot better of a passer last year. Kirby Moore, the offensive coordinator, is coming back, which is huge. Luther Burden, I already mentioned him. He's coming back, which is another big get for them. And Theo Weiss is also coming back, so he should still be a really good passer for Missouri next season. Another guy who I really like is Connor Wegman from Texas A&M. He kind of got hurt early in the season and, wasn't really able to capitalize off a promising freshman year, but he looked really good in his sophomore year before he got hurt. He could really easily become a superstar quarterback, in my opinion. And I'm excited to see what he could do for Texas A&M next year. And then another guy, Nico Iamaleava from Tennessee, I think has a lot of tools as well. I'm excited to see what he could do with Josh Heupel. He looked great against Iowa in the bowl game. He's kind of the future for that Tennessee program. I'm excited to see what he can do as a former top 10 recruit coming out of high school in his sophomore year.
And Max, you mentioned Nico, and that's where I wanted to go next, because I know with PFF, you obviously need a sample size to create statistics and create the numbers that you guys do. But of the newcomers coming in, you mentioned, Nico taking over as QB1, and whether they're newcomers new to the school or they're their first year at QB1, Nico at Tennessee, Garrett Nussmeier at LSU, Blake Shapen comes from Baylor to Mississippi State, Lenoris Sellers for South Carolina, Taylon Green over at Arkansas. What do the numbers tell you when it comes to those guys? And are there maybe some of the transfers too? Are there guys that you were expecting a lot of that the numbers say that at their previous stops they were really good or have the potential to break out? Or like when it comes to that newcomer batch of quarterbacks, like you mentioned, I think Nico's the obvious answer of who we expect to pop. But who are some of those other guys? Are there any others that the numbers reflect on them positively and you could expect them to do big things?
Yeah, obviously you mentioned Nico is probably the guy next year that everyone's kind of looking at, expecting to have a massive season. Kind of, Joe Milton III didn't really do as well as a lot of people expected him to do. So I think Nico is a guy that I'm really excited about seeing next year. But yeah, like you mentioned, there are some other guys in the SEC next year that people are excited about. And one of them, honestly, that I'm pretty excited to see what he can do is Brock Vandagriff going to Kentucky. He was a guy at Georgia, sat behind Stetson Bennett for a few years, sat behind Carson Beck this past year. He was a former 5-star recruit, man, and he kind of just rode the bench for 3 years. I was kind of surprised that Vandagriff didn't transfer sooner. Usually those 5-star quarterbacks, they usually would be willing to sit on the bench for 1 year. And then after that, it's like, okay, I got to get out of here and make sure I can, try to get to the NFL. Vandagriff really sat on the bench for 3 years. Like he really could have been declaring for the NFL draft by now, but he just wasn't able to play at all. So now he's going to school in Kentucky where he will be the starting quarterback. I'm excited to see what he can finally do as his former 5-star quarterback who really just hasn't shown anything in 3 years because he hasn't had the chance to yet, honestly. So that is one guy that I am excited about seeing next year and just seeing what he can actually do for them. But yeah, Garrett Nussmeier is another guy who I really think has shown a lot of promise in his tenure. Of course, The concerns are LSU's losing a lot offensively. Malik Neighbors is gone. Brian Thomas Jr. is gone. Mike Denbrock, the offensive coordinator, is gone as well. He's going to Notre Dame. So they lose a lot offensively, but I'm still excited to see what Garrett Nussmeier can do. But yeah, I would say Brock Vandagriff's the one guy I'm really, really keeping an eye on. Garrett Nussmeier should have another great year. And obviously Nico should be the guy that is kind of the breakout star in college football next year, in my opinion.
Max, you mentioned LSU. That LSU defense last year, has there ever been a defense that graded worse on PFF than that one? I find it hard to believe so, because that was probably the worst defense in LSU history.
Yeah. Dude, it was so bad. And that's why I thought Jaden Daniels was the clear Heisman Trophy winner, and I'm very happy he won it, honestly. I thought it was one of the best Heisman years we've had in recent memory. The reason why people were so down on it was because LSU went 9-3 that year. But I keep reminding people, like, dude, those 3 losses, they averaged 47 allowed points per game. Like, they were letting up nearly 50 points per game in those 3 losses. So that's not on Jaden Daniels at all. It's kind of like the USC effect the last few years, where USC's got this unbelievable. LSU had the best offense in college football this past season and still went 9-3. That just shows you how bad that defense was. And LSU had a quarterback who's going to go in the top 5 of the NFL draft this year, probably. Malik Neighbors also might be a top 5 pick. And then Brian Thomas Jr. is going to be a first-round pick as well. And then next year, Will Campbell, in my opinion, is the best best offensive tackle in college football, and will be a top 5 to 10 pick probably too in 2025. So they had serious talent offensively and still went 9-3. So hopefully it should be better now. Hopefully Harold Perkins will actually be used correctly. They kind of played him as an off-ball linebacker this past year, when I don't really think that's the best way to use him. I think you got to use him kind of like a Micah Parsons, where he's kind of rushing the passer instead of playing in coverage. So I think Harold Perkins will hopefully be used better by Blake Baker, the new defensive coordinator there. But yeah, the defense has to be better for LSU, especially when the offense could be taking a step back, obviously, with losing so many superstars on that offense side of the ball.
Max, sticking with quarterbacks, I want to zero in on a guy specifically, Peyton Thorne at Auburn. I'm not a Peyton Thorne guy. I was stunned that Hugh Freeze did not go out and get a quarterback from the transfer portal, get somebody else. You watch Peyton Thorne last year, it felt like every time he played a defense with a pulse, he faltered. Do the numbers reflect that, or am I being too harsh on Peyton Thorne?
No, I think you're right. I think Peyton Thorne, he was a guy that, at Michigan State was just this really, especially in 2021, when they had the kind of that breakout year, he's a really solid quarterback for them. He kind of was a game manager. He kind of got relied on to do a lot. He's a really good runner of the football, don't get me wrong, for Auburn. But as a passer, you're right. He only had a 64.3 passing grade this past season. I will say one thing that I'm still kind of eyeing right now is Jordan McLeod, James Madison's quarterback, is still available in the transfer portal. And a lot of smoke has been that Auburn is a school to watch for him. So I don't think it's out of the cards yet that they might still go out and get a guy in the portal, and a guy like Jordan McLeod, who, again, coming from the Sun Belt, and James Madison, but he did play really well for James Madison. So I'm not saying they are going to go get him. He's still available. He's been available in the portal for a couple months now, honestly, which is pretty surprising. But he's a guy that Auburn has been talked about for, and maybe could be the guy they get in the portal. But if not, yeah, it does sound like Peyton Thorne will be the guy again next year, especially with Robbie Ashford transferring to South Carolina to compete with Lenora Sellers. If they don't go out and get Jordan McLeod or another guy who enters the portal maybe later on this offseason, yeah, it does sound like Peyton Thorne will be the guy next year, which kind of does, sour your outlook for Auburn a little bit going into 2024.
So, Max, I'm sure the numbers point to this, and I'll ask you point blank. Is Georgia the team to beat in 2024?
Yes. Yeah, I think they are, especially in the SEC. I think they are. I do think I had the number 1 in my way too early ranking. I do think Ohio State is a super close second. In fact, if you ask me to make a national championship prediction right now, I might pick Ohio State to win it all with how loaded that roster is. But Georgia has some really, really talented players. Obviously, you mentioned already, best quarterback in the country in Carson Beck. They went out and got Trevor Etienne in the portal, which I think was a big, big get. They got Benjamin Urasek from Stanford, the tight end, who I think is a top 5 tight end in the country. They should still have a really good offensive line, especially on the interior with Tate Ratledge kind of anchoring it. They got some really good defensive players as well, especially Malachi Starks, who's one of the best safeties in the country. Yeah, I don't think there's not a clear number 1 team in the country right now, in my opinion. But I think there's a pretty clear top 2 or top 3, depending on how much you like Oregon too. But I would say Georgia is right now a slight favorite for me to be number one, but Ohio State is right there with them, in my opinion, too.
How do you think Texas and Oklahoma fit into the new SEC? Texas obviously coming off that college football playoff appearance. Oklahoma coming off a 10-win season. Ugly loss in the bowl game. But, I mean, again, bowl games are bowl games. You had Jackson Arnold starting in that game for Dylan Gabriel. New quarterback. Really a makeshift offensive line, or a retooled offensive line, I should say, for the Sooners. Texas and OU, your outlooks, your projections for how those two teams fare in the Southeastern Conference.
Yeah, I think Texas, I think they're both going to be really good. I think they both were top 20 teams, my updated ranking. Texas, I had it all the way up at number 4, so I expect them to be still a legitimate national title contender next year, and it all starts with Quinn Ewers coming back to school, honestly. He's a top 5 quarterback in the country, has all the tools to be even higher than that. They do lose some pieces, like I mentioned before, but they also bring in some talented players in the transfer portal, especially Isaiah Bond, the speedy receiver from Alabama. He should be Quinn Ewers' kind of new top target at Texas this year, especially with his big arm combined with Bond's speed. It should be really, really fun in that offense. And then defensively, they got some interesting pieces on that defense as well. Andrew Makuba, the former Clemson corner / safety, whatever you want to call him, he transfers in. They got some really exciting young players on that defensive side of the ball too. So I think Texas is still a national title contender next year, and especially is probably the second best team in the SEC, I would say, behind Georgia right now. Oklahoma, they're a top 20 team. Maybe if they have a really great year, they could sneak into the playoff as one of the 7 teams that at-large teams. But yeah, they got a new quarterback in Jackson Arnold. They lose some key players as well. Dylan Gabriel, they lost, who I really like Dylan Gabriel a lot. But they should still have an exciting outlook for next year with Jackson Arnold as a former top 10 recruit. And a guy like Nico, you're expecting big things out of as a former top 10 recruit in his sophomore year. So Oklahoma, I'm a little bit lower on than Texas, obviously, but I still think Oklahoma is going to be a really quality team next year. And should still be like a top 20-ish team in college football, honestly.
Sam Pittman at Arkansas, Billy Napier at Florida, Max. That's a pair of coaches that enter the 2024 season with their seats, let's call it for what it is, scorching. Which of those two would you say is more likely to make it to 2025?
Oh, man. I don't think either are likely, but I will probably give the edge to Sam Pittman, only because I think the Florida expectations are so high, and Florida's schedule next year is brutal, man. I mean, they play every SEC team schedule is brutal when you play in the best conference in college football, honestly. But Florida especially, man, they play some really, really quality teams. I think like 7 or so teams that were in my top 25 or something close to that. So if they lose all those games, and that's a 5-7 year right there, honestly, I don't know what the minimum record will be for Billy Napier to keep his job. It might be like a 7-5, 8-4 type of year. And just looking at that schedule and what Florida has coming back, I don't know if that is really in the cards for them. So yeah, it's going to be tough for Billy Napier to win enough games, I think, in 2024 to keep his job. They do have a really the number 1 quarterback in the country coming in DJ Lagway, who maybe, Florida decision makers will say, okay, we'll give Billy Napier a little bit of time to develop that kid and see what he can do with him. But I don't even know if they will do that, honestly, because if he goes 5-7 or even worse this year, that I don't think will be good enough for him to keep his job in 2025.
Max, let's talk Shane Beamer's South Carolina program. What do you make of them? Popped off in year 2, right? Overachieved in year 1, popped off in year 2 with 8 wins, those back-to-back top 10 wins, end of season, Tennessee, Clemson. Took a step back last year with Spencer Rattler, who I'm sure the PFF grades for him, for Xavier Legette, like the numbers were fantastic, and it did not match what that team necessarily, it felt like, was doing on the field, going 5-7, missing a bowl game. Now you go into year 4, right? I think for the first time ever, Shane Beamer's seat starting to feel some pressure, starting to warm up a bit. What do you make of Shane Beamer and the South Carolina Gamecocks, especially in a new-look SEC with Texas and OU and a brand-new quarterback in Lenoris Sellers?
Yeah, I think it's a big year for Shane Beamer. I do like Shane Beamer, but you mentioned it was a very disappointing year this past season, and I think something like that, Spencer Rattler, he did improve this past season, which is funny enough because like when they went 8-4, I didn't really think Rattler played that well. I thought he played a lot better this year, and they went 5-7. So what that tells you is the kind of supporting cast for Rattler this past year wasn't great. I know Xavier Legette's a really talented player. He's going to be a second-round pick probably, but they lost Juice Wells basically for the entire season with that foot injury. Now he's over at Ole Miss now. Yeah, it's going to be tough with the new quarterback in Lenore Sellers, some new faces on both sides of the ball too. They got some exciting recruits. I know they brought in a few 5-stars over the last couple of years, but yeah, it's gonna be a big year for Shane Beamer. I don't know how much of the hot seat he is. If they have another really bad year, maybe he would get fired. But it is definitely a major year for Shane Beamer, and he has to prove a lot, honestly, in 2024.
Now, I'm sure at PFF, you guys do head coaching grades and grade coordinators and grade coaching staffs and stuff like that. So we'll ask you about the new head coaches in the SEC. We mentioned Kalen DeBoer at Oklahoma. You can talk about him, but Jeff Lebby at Mississippi State, Mike Elko at Texas A&M, and then, of course, DeBoer. Your thoughts on the new head coaches, each of those gentlemen individually, the fits, and how you think they're going to fare at their new schools?
Yeah, honestly, I really like all three of them. Honestly, I think the big one obviously is DeBoer. And anytime you're replacing Nick Saban, like that's a tall task. But he would have been probably my second option for Alabama to go after. I think Dan Lanning would have been my top choice. It sounded like Dan Lanning turned that down. So after that, I would have gone after Kalen DeBoer. I mean, he's a proven winner. I think he's only lost 12 games as a head coach in his career, dating back to his time at obviously Washington, Fresno State, and Sioux Falls too. It's like D2 school. So he's like 104-12 record. So he's a winner, man. He's got to recruit at a high level. He's got to keep players at a high level. I think that's what Nick Saban did so well, is that not only is he a terrific coach, he also was one of the best recruiters we've ever seen in college football. DeBoer's got to do that. And he's shown signs that he will do that a little bit. But he's an offensive genius, man. And I'm excited to see what he can do with a quarterback like Jalen Monroe, who has some of the best tools in college football. If he can have the same amount of success with Monroe as he did with Michael Penix Jr. in developing him, a Heisman Trophy could definitely be in the cards for Jalen Monroe in 2024. As for the other ones, I love the hire, again, of Texas A&M going out and getting Mike Elko. The big thing with A&M has not been talent. You know, they've had the talented team. In fact, just going off recruiting and how they were recruiting coming out of high school, Texas A&M had a top 5 team in the country this past season, according to 24/7's team talent composite rating. So they should have been like a playoff contender with the talent they had. The only problem is that the discipline just wasn't there. And I think that was the big problem with them. And that's something that Duke really has excelled at. Duke is not a school that recruits at a high level, but yet Mike Elko was winning, turned that program around immediately and was winning like 8-9 games with the talent he had. So I think that would be great there at A&M. Again, like DeBoer, you got to recruit again at a high level, which I think he can do at a place like Texas A&M, but he's familiar with it. He was Jimbo Fisher's defensive coordinator for a few years. So he's familiar with Texas A&M, and I love the hire. I'm excited to see what he can do. And then finally, Jeff Lebby, he was one of the best offensive coordinators in college football, in my opinion. Honestly, Oklahoma had like a top 5 offense in the country, even though you look at that Oklahoma offense, there really weren't too many like future NFL stars. I know they had Tyler Guyton's gonna be a first-round pick probably, but other than that, they really didn't have too much. And Mississippi State's a school that really kind of lost its way after the unfortunate passing of Mike Leach, where they're kind of, trying to become more of a defensive school. Just never really worked out, and the offense was terrible this past year. Now you get a guy like Jeff Lebby, who, again, I really, really think is one of the brightest offensive minds in the sport. That should turn around Mississippi State, and they should be a lot better offensively. So, honestly, all three of them, I was big fans of all three of those hires in the SEC this year.
Max, is there a player in the SEC that the numbers favor, that people aren't talking about, people are maybe, say, sleeping on coming in the 2024 season? Like, is there a guy in the SEC that you will not be surprised if and when he becomes a star? The numbers point to that, maybe in limited action, or just, again, a guy that's underappreciated that you will not be surprised at all when he breaks out on the scene, and you're going to kind of see it coming, if you will, based off what numbers are telling you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think obviously not a lot of people like to talk about offensive line. I think Parker Brailsford is going to be my top offensive lineman, interior offensive lineman, excuse me. He transfers in from Washington, the center. Alabama's interior offensive line is disgusting. I actually, in my top 10 interior offensive linemen, all three of Alabama's interior offensive linemen are in my top 7 in the country. So they're going to have a disgusting interior offensive line. Going to the other side of the ball, though, one guy who I was watching his tape, he's actually transferring in to an SEC school. So we didn't play the SEC last year, but Nick Scourton, the edge defender from Purdue, I think he's a superstar, man. He's transferring into Texas A&M, so big get from Mike Elko. He's a stud, and I think he could be a first round pick, honestly, in 2025. I think right now I have him like number 3 in my edge defender rankings. He's a really, really good player. So Nick Scourton, remember that name for next year because he is a little bit of a bigger edge defender, but he can move really well. A&M lost a lot of guys to the portal this offseason, but one superstar that they did get was Nick Scourton. So I think he's a guy that should have a lot of people excited about next year at Texas A&M. So yeah, him and then Prince Muialemon, I think is a little underrated too. The former Florida edge who's now at Ole Miss. He was one of the best pass rushers in college football this past season. Should be the same way for Ole Miss this year. Yeah, those are 2 guys at the edge position at least that I think are still getting underrated. And I still think could be really like superstar players probably in college football next year.
Max, final thing, and we'll get you out of here. Thoughts on where we are in college football right now with transfer portal, NIL, and also thoughts on the fact that we're already having chatter going from a 12-team college football playoff to even expanding further, and we haven't even played a single game in the 12-team format.
Dude, I know it's crazy. The fact that we're even talking about 14 now, but I think the reason why they're talking about 14 is because of the SEC and because of the Big Ten. I think the Big Ten and SEC want more automatic bids. They don't want to be treated like the ACC and Big 12 because they know, hey, we have 17 teams now or 18 teams or whatever. And we're going to need more. Like we're going to need more because we're by far the best conferences. So they're going to want like 4 automatic bids. So that's why I think they're discussing expanding because I know there's been rumors of the SEC and Big Ten breaking away from the college football playoff and kind of doing their own thing. I don't know how real that is. I don't know how true or how close they are to doing that, but I'm sure the college football playoff committee cannot afford that. So they want to, appease the SEC and Big Ten. So that's why I think it might happen. I don't know if I'm a fan of it, honestly. But yeah, you mentioned the NIL and transfer portal has made college football absolutely insane right now. I truly think it's never been more difficult to be a college football coach than it is right now, which is why I think you're seeing a lot of guys go to the NFL. And also you're seeing more college football head coaches take coordinator roles. Like Chip Kelly, the UCLA head coach, willingly left UCLA to become Ohio State's offensive coordinator because I think he just wants to call plays. He's a guy, I don't know if he wanted to deal with all the NIL stuff, all the transfer portal stuff, and that's a big reason why Nick Saban retired too, is because of all the stuff going on in college football right now. So it's definitely going in a weird way, in a way that we've never really seen before. I don't think NIL should be getting rid of. Don't get me wrong, but I do think some measures need to be put in place because it is kind of the wild west right now in terms of transfer portal, in terms of NIL. It's got to be more. It's got to be tamed a little bit. So yeah, it's definitely a wild time to be a college football fan right now. But hopefully they figure out some stuff in the near future to kind of cool it off a little bit.
Max Chadwick, he's a college football analyst for Pro Football Focus, host of Preferred Walk On, a great college football podcast. Max, appreciate you taking the time, my friend. Keep up the great work, and let's definitely do this again soon.
Of course. Thanks so much, Chris.